You learn a highway's face by what it does when it thinks no one is watching. In daylight, the westbound lanes of I-70 over the prairie look honest and simple. Concrete, seams, white skip line, rumble strip. A plain promise to get you where you said you'd go. At 2 a.m. under a hard closure, with our light towers throwing fake noon onto empty miles. It isn't simple. It looks like a country that forgot what language it was built in and keeps speaking anyway. There were 3 of us on the night crew. Vance drove the crash truck and minded the aero board and the paperwork no one reads unless something goes wrong. Lena staged paint and beads and swapped out my nozzles and kept a count in her head of how many cones we out-deployed, like rosary beads for people who worship schedules. I walked the striper, waist-high frame, warm gun, hopper full of glass beads that rained through a chute to make the line bright under headlights. I've pushed more miles of paint than I've slept good nights. The rhythm settles you, hiss of the gun, soft rattle of beads, generators even hum, boot falls ticking off quarter miles between markers. You stop being a person and become a metronome laid on its side. The contract was 4 nights from exit 314 down to 309, westbound lanes only. We chalked the ghost lines at twilight, snapped string, measured offsets, set cones, lit the towers. We were on pace. The air felt tight in a way I couldn't name, like we'd been moved into a smaller room than the sky promised. But that happens when you're tired. The prairie wind can fool you. It sounds wide and is sometimes a pocket. At 2:13 exactly, the radio on my belt cleared its throat and spoke like we detuned into 1978 with the volume low. Eastbound jackknife at mile 311. Expected delays. KTRC traffic, 2:02 a.m. I stopped with my hands on the striper, S handles, and looked back at the truck. Lena lifted one ear cup and blinked at me. She'd heard it too. Vance just squinted like a man staring down a trick and said, "Interference," as if a single word could staple the night back to the present. Our band radios are short-range junk. They talk to each other and that's it. They don't pull in FM, don't chase farm reports or high school games. The voice I heard had the tinny jeer of old broadcast, like a bright suit behind a desk somewhere, reading the road like weather. I told myself the generator was throwing noise into the set. I told myself a lot of things, and then I did what people who work at night do. I went back to my job, because anything else invites the sort of story that's hard to explain on the incident form. The first mile marker after that said 314. It should have said 313. The one after that said 313. The one after that said 312. We were walking west, and the numbers were counting down in the same direction we were moving. That isn't how a state thinks. A state thinks in increments that agree with themselves. "Vance," Lena said over the channel, a careful calm she keeps for when bolts shear and straps snap. "Our markers are out of sequence." "Your feet are in sequence," he said. "You keep those going. District's asleep." He wasn't wrong. The state can be awake and still sleep right through you. I kept the guide laser centered on our chalk and opened the trigger. Paint hissed out in that perfect ribbon that makes people think roads are simple. Beads rattled, fell, and seeded like frost. The air smelled like solvents and wet dust. I was a line that kept adding itself to the world. At 2:28, the eastbound lane, which was supposed to be sealed for the night with closures at every ramp for 10 miles, caught a pair of yellowed headlamps that drifted toward us, slow and certain. The car slid between cones like they'd been set for its convenience. A long chrome-smiled sedan with corners you don't see on anything newer than Reagan. It rolled to where the 𝗦𝗓𝗚𝗛 rest stop used to be, eased into a space that didn't exist anymore, and went still with a politeness that set my teeth on edge. The rest stop had been scraped the summer before, the museum gone, the picnic shelters hauled away, power cut, utilities capped and marked. We'd painted right past the scar of it on a day shift in August, cursed the heat, and counted ourselves lucky the bid didn't include shoulder seal. Empty, dead, accounted for. The driver door opened and a man got out like a photo come to life. Hat, jacket, trousers, with a crease too serious for a midnight stop. He held the top of the door, looked our way, then turned toward the field and walked slowly into nothing. A second later, the rest stoplights came on. High sodium orange, the kind that makes shadows look bruised. Lena whispered, "There's no power out there." "Generator," Vance offered mechanically, because he needed the world to be made of parts he could point at, but he knew. The radio brightened like the station had tossed to traffic again. Fog forming between mile 310 and 309. Wreckage still being cleared eastbound at 𝗦𝗓𝗚𝗛 rest stop. Next update, 2:36. I looked up at the stars. They were raw and many. No fog anywhere. Far off, a wheel line irrigator clicked through its cycle like a metronome trying to remember a song. The orange wash over the not rest stop hummed, steady, wrong. "State maintenance," Vance called through the loudhailer, voice too big in the night. "Area closed. Return to your vehicle." The man paused, lifted a hand without waving, and I saw his face in that washed-out light. A regular face, younger than his clothes, tired in the specific way people get when the world takes their plan and puts it somewhere else. He turned away and went on, shoes striking ground. We couldn't see, and yet could hear in the delicate way. Sound sometimes insists on being real. The fog arrived when the radio promised it would, not creeping or rolling, but lowering in an instant like a stage curtain. The light tower became 2 coins pushed into milk. The skip line I'd laid 30 seconds before softened and withdrew. Lena said, "Triangle," and we snapped to it, truck to striper to feeder, 10 paces, voices up, counting steps so our bodies wouldn't resolve into the white. That's when the payphone started to ring. The sound was so clean and old that my mind had to walk itself backward into remembering how to hear it. Not a tone, not a sample. A small metal bell struck in a throat of plastic. It rang with the patience of a machine built for waiting. "No phones on inventory," Vance said softly. He meant he knew every object the state claimed out here, down to the last signpost and brace, and none of it could ring like that. It rang again. "I'll go," I said, words out before I decided whether to be the kind of person who says them. "You'll stay on a leash," Lena answered, already unclipping an extension cord from a crate and feeding it through my vest, SD ring like a rope we do not tie off on flat Kansas concrete. We did now. 2 minutes, Vance said, and even his authority had a little prayer in it. "Keep talking. If you stop talking, I haul." We walked into the orange glow, counting, cord scraping my vest, like the sound of a decision you can't unmake. The gravel where the lot had been made itself under my boots. The fog folded and unfolded around the shape of a silver payphone that stood in open air at exactly the place the museum S brochure rack had once lived. Above the keypad, local 25C, old sticker, new conviction. The bell stopped exactly when my fingers touched the black handset, like a call satisfying itself. I lifted it and didn't say hello. Static like a river filled the space. Then a young man's voice found its way through 100 miles of years. "Is this the highway patrol?" "Yes," I said, "and I've never told a truer lie." "I need to report an accident," he said carefully, like the words were parts he didn't want to force. "My wife, we were pulling back onto the highway. There was a truck. I don't know how it happened. I think He couldn't make himself finish, and I couldn't make him." "Where are you?" I asked, because procedure is a rope you hold when the room is moving. "What mile marker?" 312, he said. "Eisenhower rests a stop. The lights are on. She wanted to see the hats. They're closed, I know that. But we stopped anyway. We were laughing." "What year is it?" I asked. I hated the question as it left my mouth. It felt like a parlor trick for a night that didn't deserve one. 1978, he said after a small pause, as if he were checking a calendar tacked inside his head. My body knew it before my mind allowed it. I pressed the handset harder against my ear like closeness could change the arithmetic of time. "Help is on the way," I told him, the words arriving from some toolbox built into the species. "Stay where you are. Keep the area safe if you can. Don't try to move her. Watch for oncoming traffic." "There's no one else," he said, almost wonder in it. "Just me and her, and the sound of the highway like it isn't sure it's real." "I'm here," I said, and meant it. I was exactly where he was, divided by glass you can't touch. "I'm not hanging up." He scraped a breath together. "Thank you, officer." The word made me wince. I am a man who paints lines. But I didn't correct him. "Will you tell me when it's okay to leave?" "You stay until you see the troopers," I said. "They'll have red and blue lights. You'll know them when you see them." "Okay," he whispered. After a beat, like he'd reached for something softer in his pocket and found it there, he added, "She puts pepper on watermelon. Says it makes summer wake up. I always tease her for it. I hope I always did it kind." He was quiet for a while. Somewhere in the fog, a sodium ballast hummed. The extension cord around Lena's wrist shifted as she wiped her face with her sleeve. "I see lights," he said suddenly. The bell inside the handset ticked once like a heart finding a beat. "They're here." "It's okay to hang up," I said. "Thank you," he said a second time and set the receiver down somewhere I couldn't see, and the dial tone on a phone that had no right to have a tone at all found itself and held steady for 3 breaths. Before fading into the orange hum, I put the handset back, because that's what you do for machines that kept a promise. Lena squeezed the cord, and I felt it up my back like a pulse, and we walked until the crashed truck's strobes turned from fog to geometry to truck again. None of us asked anything we didn't want an answer to. Vance put the loud hailer away, like it was something that could offend the night if he left it out. "Triangle," he said, and we moved back into the work that had called us out here in the first place. We finished the night at exit 309, on time by the clock that kept losing and finding itself. The fog peeled away in sections. The orange lights over the empty field dimmed in a way that felt like a room being cleaned. The radio didn't speak again. When the generator sighed and the tower lights became dark ladders against the sky, the prairie widened out like it had forgiven us. Day crews hate hearing about night stores. It makes them feel like somebody else has seen a part of the job they were never invited to. We said nothing at the yard. We stacked cones, rinsed the hopper outlet, drained lines, signed papers, rolled out. I slept until the afternoon and woke with the taste of old pennies in my mouth and the memory of a bell that didn't belong to me. Night 2. The radio waited until 2:13 like it had a timetable. KTRC traffic, the voice announced, bright. Lena didn't look at me. Vance didn't tilt his head. We just let the sound be what it was and moved the triangle down the mile. The markers behaved for 3 posts and then resumed their backward count. Somewhere far off, a train did the 2 long, 1 short, 1 long that says, road crossing. And I thought how funny it is that we've turned our warnings into songs. No sedan pulled in on night 2, no man in a hat, no orange lights. The fog hung out by the river bottoms and didn't come up to us. The payphone didn't ring. I kept expecting the bell, and the not ringing was its own sound. Work went honest. The line came out clean. We made good time. I heard Lena softly to herself and nod into the mic say, maybe he found them. I didn't ask who she meant. When dawn pushed a thumb under the horizon, we were exactly where the plan said we'd be. Night 3, the fog fell early. It lowered before the radio could predict it. And the way it did it, fast, vertical, made my skin think of traps. We cinched the triangle tight, 6 paces instead of 10, and worked by the patient ovals of our headlamps. Every sound got too close. A mouse in the grass sounded like something picking its way through our tools. A wind shift up the ditch sounded like a man changing his mind. The bell rang once and stopped, and in the stop was the purest silence I've ever been in. Vance didn't like that at all. He moved in until his shoulder almost touched mine and said, conversational and aimless. Took a call on a payphone once, back when you could stand inside a booth without feeling like you were pretending. Sinclair outside Abilene. Kid said his car was stuck in mud. Said he was sorry if this was the wrong number. I told him to hang on. He did. He didn't tell the rest, and I didn't ask it to come. We painted through a white that kept insisting it was a wall. The triangle saved us. That's what a triangle is for, something that doesn't fall if one leg stumbles. The bell did not ring again. The radio stayed quiet past 2:31. The air had the smell wet steel gets, like a penny without the copper. At 2:36 exactly, as if whoever had forgotten their cue made it to their mark, breathless and apologizing. The radio came alive and said cheerfully, fatality cleared at Eisenhower. Rest stop, all lanes open. Next update, 2:41. Something unhooked in my chest so smoothly, I didn't feel it happen, only noticed the slack. Lena closed her eyes for a moment. Vance clicked his tongue like an old habit. That means, amen. Night 4, the last of the contract, the world behaved. The markers climbed the way they're supposed to. The fog stayed in the east, like a parade we weren't invited to. The radio played only our own voices, and the occasional sigh of static. That means, night is big. We broke down early because sometimes the state lets you beat the clock and doesn't take revenge. And by the time the birds were stitching their stitch lines along the fence, our cones were nested, and the striper was tied down, and the arrow board was turned to black. When I drove back through in daylight 2 days later, on my way to a day job near 𝗦𝗓𝗓𝗓, I pulled onto the shoulder at 312, like a man who had been given a test he hadn't studied for and hoped to copy the right answers out of air. The field was exactly a field. Clipped grass, some plastic snags on the fence. A big, bare rectangle where the building's footprint had resisted weeds. No poles, no fixtures, no phone. The only sound was a grasshopper that hadn't got the memo about autumn yet. I climbed the ditch and stood where the brochures would have sat. I didn't say anything. I didn't take my hat off or hold my hands in a particular way. It isn't a grave if you don't decide to make it one, and I didn't want to do that to the highway. I just waited long enough to be sure I wasn't going to hear a bell. I didn't. The silence had no hinge to it. That felt right. After that, I stuck to day shifts for a while. People will tell you it's because nights are hard on the body, and that's true. They don't tell you. They re-hard on the inventory you keep of what the world contains and what it doesn't need. My inventory needed to be counted in sunshine for a spell. But work is a tide. It goes out in ways that look like choice and comes in like a hand closing. 2 months later, I was back on nights outside Colby, climbing into a vest that knew my shape too well and checking a gun that knew my hands too well. I told myself not to think of bells. I told myself to count cones and believe in paint. We were prepping a ramp when the scan function in my cab S radio hiccuped between 2 country stations. And for half a second, a bright voice said, "KTRC traffic," in the same confident chirp a man uses when he's been taught to keep you calm with vowels. And I had to put my head down on the wheel and breathe through the sudden sense that a room I don't live in anymore still had my cup on the counter. I carry quarters now. They ride in the tiny pocket inside my pocket like old soldiers. Not because I think a machine will ask for them, but because I like the weight. It is a promise I can make to the night. If someone dials the wrong year and gets me, I won't leave them there alone with the lights. I'll stay until they see the red and blue. When the weather cools and the air clears out to that hard glass Kansas transparency, there are stretches where you can see a mile of your own line, ahead of you bright as bone and all the world behind it, fading into practical dark. On those nights, if the wind aligns with the ditch just right, it carries a sound along the grass, like a zipper being pulled slow. I catch myself listening for a bell inside it. I don't want to hear it, and I don't not want to. I want to be the kind of man who could pick it up again without making it about himself. If you've never walked a striper under tower lights with the fog taking bites out of your field of view, you might think the job is measuring. It is. But more than that, it's deciding where someone you will never meet should feel safe, and then making that true with paint and glass and a belief in straight lines. You do that enough nights, you start to think you can lay a stripe through any kind of dark. Then, one night, the dark lays a stripe through you, and you spend the rest of your shifts stepping over it. That's fine. The road's full of lines. You learn to walk between. Once in a while, eastbound, long after midnight, when the traffic drops to a rumor, and the prairie takes a breath big enough to pull the stars down closer, I catch an orange blush out by 312 that isn't there when I look straight at it. Peripheral memory. That old trickster. I keep my hands on the wheel and my eyes steady and let it fall away like an exit I never meant to take. I don't pull over. I don't chase a sound that isn't for me anymore. I let the mile marker count up the right way and believe in the simple miracle of an honest number. I don't know whether the man in the hat made it to the troopers, or whether the troopers made it to him, or whether time moved its furniture around long enough to let somebody leave. I think about Lila more than I should for a stranger whose name I only heard once in a fog. I picture a hat on a mannequin head behind glass and a note typed on a card, and her laughing at Pepper on watermelon while somebody who loves her pretends to hate it. In my head, the museum is open, and the air conditioning is 10 degrees too cold, and the volunteer at the desk is telling a story she's told 1,000 times, and a young couple on a night drive decides on a whim to stop and listen. That's not how it went. That's not how it goes. The highway is a number line, rational and ruthless. You measure your life in markers and minutes and paint drum levels. And if you're lucky, when it's your turn to pull over, somebody answers and says, "Stay until you see the lights." You'll know them. I've learned to be grateful for the shape of a job that gives me a thing to hold when the wind makes itself a smaller room around me. My hands fit the striper's handles like a handshake we never had to practice. The bead valve sticks just a little when the dew settles. The generator always sounds like it's explaining itself. These are the small reliables. I don't look for miracles, and I don't look away when they show up. And those two stances together feel like something close to the kind of faith a person who sleeps days might be allowed. There are nights I walk the line and the paint hisses out, and the glass falls, and the beam of the guide light finds chalk and holds to it, and the radio on my belt is only our voices counting off distances and steps. And there are nights a bright voice from some other county of time clears its throat and gives me the weather for a year that doesn't have me in it yet. On those nights, I stand still for one breath and remember a phone ringing with the patience of a bell, and I tell the part of me that wants to run that we do not run, we do not wander. We stand in a triangle and make the world truer by inches. If you ever find yourself alone on a closed lane, standing in tower light, that throws your shadow too hard onto concrete, that has had a car on it for hours, and your radio says something cheerful and wrong about a place that isn't there, don't. To try to argue the night into sense, put one foot in front of the other, keep your triangle tight, count your steps out loud, and if a bell rings from a year that needs you, answer. Say the line you already know by heart. Stay until the lights arrive. Then put the receiver down, gentle, and go back to the job. The road wakes up at dawn, whether or not it believed in you at 2 in the morning. It's going to need its